February 5th at 12 p.m. Would you please join me in pledge allegiance to the flag? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, Bev.
Nelson?
Yes.
Knapp?
Yes.
Rexenko?
Yes.
Stipchak?
Yes.
Witt?
Yes. Motion approved agenda.
Is there a second? Motion made and second to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. I'd like to welcome everybody in the chamber today. We've got a fairly heavy schedule going ahead of us today, so we will certainly try to be right on going. So, first thing on the agenda is a general discussion. And where we handle our general discussion, if anybody's had any concerns or comments or things they want to talk about, we ask them to stand up at the podium, state their name and address, and we will certainly take everything into consideration. The council really cannot make decisions on the topics today, but they're always willing to take into consideration what you may have to offer. So, do we have anybody on general discussion that's got any concerns? Hearing or seeing none, we'll move into the thumbs up award. John?
Nothing.
Claire?
John's back.
John's back.
Thumbs up. Thank you. We feel
We missed
whole.
it. We
feel
missed it.
whole.
We can start now.
Well, 3/4 anyway. Back, I don't know.
Steve?
I have two. One was for Neil Adler and the chamber for their chamber dinner that they hosted a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was a great evening. Did a nice job. And the second one is for, I believe it's Scott Tillman. Is he the city worker that works on the city crew? Is it? Yeah. I saw him yesterday. I was on my way to serve lunch at Galen, and he was stopped helping a driver at an intersection where so they couldn't get traction, and he was stopping traffic, and he then helped her get turned around and going down the hill rather than going up the hill, and waved her on good safety and helping the citizen of our community. So thumbs up to him.
Real good. Thank you very kindly, Steve. Rex?
No, that's it.
Okay. Okay, going on to the consent items. All items listed under consent agenda will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion on those items unless a request is made prior to the time the council votes on the motion. Today we've got three of them. Approval of the January 15th, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Number 2 is a list of bills for the period ending 1/31/19. Number 3 is a renewal of a beer permit, Kimes Country Store. Does anybody have any questions on any of these? None, I would
Motion
entertain.
approved consent items 1 through 3.
Second.
Motion made and second. We gotta have a roll call on it, don't we, Bev? Oh, I thought there was a, okay, motion been made and second on the consent items 1 through 3. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to the action items. Fiscal year 2018, number 1 is a comprehensive annual financial report. And this is on due to regard to our hospital.
No,
Or excuse me, I'm
city.
sorry. Sorry about that. The council has received a copy of the fiscal year 2018 comprehensive annual financial report. A representative from the Williams and Company will be at the meeting to discuss the report, and I see Graham Forbes is here representing Williams and Company, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Graham, and share with us what you have to say.
Yeah, so it sounds like you do have a healthy agenda, so I will keep things pretty high level here. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions or comments, or Jason or Bev areas you want to comment on. Feel free to pipe in as necessary here. Just quickly want to thank Bev and Jason and the rest of the city staff for providing us the info to put this 100 and some page document together, as well as getting us information we need to actually audit the amounts as well. Takes a lot of their time, and we appreciate their assistance with that. So thank you. I said I'll keep things brief. The first item I'll hit here is on page 4 of the report that I think you've got in front of you. And that opinion paragraph is exactly like it sounds, where we say, based on our opinion, that these financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. So that's a clean, if you will, or unmodified opinion, no disclaimers, adverse opinions, things of that nature, just a clean opinion. So that's what we're after there. And as it does go on, Sarah, and then we also, a component unit of the city, as you all know, is the hospital, which is audited by another CPA firm, and we use their audit opinion on their separate audit, which is also an unmodified opinion on the hospital audit done by that firm as well. So both clean opinions there. So nothing of note. Starting then on page 6, I believe, is the management's discussion analysis. That's some good comparative information from FY18 to FY17, and then some commentary put together by city staff on some of the circumstances behind some of those changes up or down and some of those line items, and just kind of, how did we get from where we're at in 17 to where we are at 18, and some good commentary from city staff there. So if you're looking and don't want to flip through all 100 pages, but want to get a kind of high level view of where we at, that would be a good place to start there, I think, for sure. From there, flipping to the financials, I'll skip you to page 21 and 22. And that's where we get into the actual financial statements, and you'll see a separate column for each of the city's governmental major funds. The ones I'll point out here briefly are the general fund. You'll see towards the bottom of the page that it was a pretty stable year for the general fund. There's actually a small decrease of $41,000 overall. But one thing I will point out, and this is noted in the MD&A as well, one of the ways we track that general fund is the number of days expenditures in the unassigned fund balance. So even though our total overall fund balance decreased by $41,000, the number of days expenses in the unassigned fund balance increased from 69 to 84 days. The big reason for that with the overall decrease was the amount of unassigned increase because of mainly due to the loan the city made to the LBIC for the transload facility. As those dollars are repaid, that is more dollars that move from a non-spendable component of fund balance down to a unassigned spendable component of fund balance. So an overall small decrease, but that unassigned number increased, which is kind of your liquid number that kind of shows, dollars that are available to be spent for the proper purposes in that general fund. So an increase to 84 days is obviously moving in the right direction. And
Where do you want that to be, Graham? I know I ask you every year, and you 100?
yeah, I mean, we'd like to see somewhere 100 to 120 days. Basically the thought process is enough available funds. Your big property tax paydays are March and October. So basically enough funds to cash flow things comfortably between those. Obviously there's other revenue streams in the mix there too, but to get you between those two big ones.
And then that's calculated at how much per day, roughly?
So it's nothing scientific. Basically all we're doing is as you can see there on page 21, total general fund expenditures for FY18 were $8.3 million. Divide that by 365 is all we're doing to get there, Clark. And then the unassigned fund balance amount you'll see is on page, towards the bottom of page 19. Just a little over $1.9 million at June 30, 2018. So we're just figuring out what the per day at 365 is of the 8.3 million, dividing that into the 1.9 million.
Okay, I follow, okay. I'll forget and ask you again next year.
No problem. No problem. So overall, a stable year for the general fund. The only other one I'll point out is in the bypass urban renewal. A pretty healthy decrease in fund balance there. The main component of that was, as you can see, there were some significant transfers out of the fund. A big piece of that was $2.5 million that went to the sewer fund. to help facilitate the refunding of some revenue bonds and some other debt service decreases in the sewer area with some TIF dollars for some improvements that were done in the TIF urban renewal area there. So at that note, I guess I'll have you flip 2 pages, 26 and 27. And there in the sewer column, we can kind of see most of the other side of that, where the sewer showed a pretty healthy change in that position of about 3.2 million. A big component of that was, as you can see, $2.5 million was transferred into the sewer fund, which came from that bypass urban renewal district. Other than that, the water showed a modest increase in that position. The non-majors, again, a small increase, but pretty stable for the year. So nothing real unusual or out of the ordinary to note there. Following that, starting on page 33 is the notes to the financials. I'm not going to spend any time with that, but there's a lot of detail there on accounting policy, a lot of detail on outstanding debt the city has, maturity schedules, interest rates, information there, and then a lot of information on the city's net pension liability, which is the city's proportionate share of IPER's unfunded liability, and then the city's other post-employment benefits, which per state code, the city has to allow retirees to stay on the group plan, albeit at their cost. There's a bunch of actuarial calculations and amounts that go into calculating that liability, and there's disclosure on that as well. So again, a lot more minutia than we probably want to get into today, but if you're looking to dig into any of those amounts on the financials and get some more information behind them, you can find a lot of that information in the notes section there. So other than that, following the notes is some more even further schedules on that net pension liability and some of the details on how that's calculated. And other than that, and then some combining schedules on some of the smaller funds of the city. And I think the only other thing I'll point out is on 73 and 74 is, and I think I usually point out every year, that what we call the budget comparison schedule, where we'll take the actual budgeted amounts for FY18, and then if any amendments were made throughout the year, which there was, and compare that to how did we actually do for the year, and compare that to what was budgeted. And as you'll see on that far right column, that what we really focus on is the disbursement, the functional area, public safety, public works, debt service, business type, and you'll see that none of those functional areas were over budget for the year. So obviously a good event to have happen there, to stay each one of those functional areas as well as overall to be under budget. So good news there. Otherwise, again, there's some combining schedules and then some required reporting we have for government auditing standards and some state compliance areas and a few things like that. But nothing I'm going to go to in any more detail unless you would have more questions. I'd be happy to field any of those. Or Bev or Jason, any other areas to hit on?
Do you have any questions? Any council members, any questions for Graham on the report?
I guess, overall, for me, and maybe people watching, overall health of the city, F being a failure, A being, A plus being fantastic, simple grade. Where are we at?
And that's always, we get that question a lot, always hard to.
It's subjective.
Right, I mean,
You're the professional.
I'm sure there's some folks that say it's an F because you don't provide the service they want, and, others, it's all about services provided, things like that. I mean,
Absolutely.
just from a pure financial standpoint, the general fund, we saw that increased unassigned fund balance, which was positive. Would we, in a perfect world, like to see that a few days higher? Yes, and we talked about that. From a debt capacity, I think when we did an exit conference with Jason and Beth last week, we decided we're at about 38% usage, I believe, and that's in the MD&A schedule, but I believe we're at about 38% usage of the statutory debt limit the city could have, which is based on taxable valuation and then the applicable GO bonds that are outstanding. So from a debt standpoint, only utilizing 38% of the max bonded capacity is, I would say, in a healthy position. And then the enterprise funds, I think, are, growing, based on some rate increases and things like that, to make sure that the proper funds are there for ongoing operations, and then, future maintenance and rehab costs are built into that as well. So, overall, I guess I don't have a grade in mine, Clark, but I mean, the city's sitting well.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Motion accepting the City of Lamar's comprehensive annual financial report for the year ending June 30th, 2018.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and second, accepting the City of Lamar's comprehensive annual financial report for the year ending June 30th, 2018. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thanks a lot, Graham.
Yeah, thank you. And Chad Renier here, a manager in our office, that was responsible for a lot of the legwork on the audit this year and the last several years, and want to recognize him as well. I know he works very closely with Bev on getting everything taken care of, so.
Thanks, Chad and Graham, for what you
Yep,
did.
thank you.
Okay, moving on to action item number 2. The Community Wellness Center expansion and renovation project. The Community Wellness Center, CWC, expansion renovation project is one of 9 community betterment projects, number 2, CB2. The project was approved by the Lamar's Area Betterment Foundation, LABF, and fundraising was and is done to fund the project. The CWC project is also one of 5 Vision Iowa CAT grant projects. Vision Iowa awarded $450,000 toward the completion of the 5 projects. With all the projects, the City of Lamar's is responsible for the construction and the financing with reimbursement from the Lamar's Area Betterment Foundation and Vision Iowa. The city has received roughly $1,345,000 from the Lamar's Area Betterment Foundation to date, and roughly $255,000 from Vision Iowa in reimbursements. CMBA architects were contacted to provide a proposal for the design and the estimated for the construction of the CWC expansion and renovation project. CMBA's proposal with estimate is attached. Also attached is the use of a space concept provided by the YMCA, which will be the basis of the CMBA's design. There's a time constraint when it comes to the completion of the CWC project. The Vision Iowa CAT grant currently requires the project to be completed by December 31st, 2019. Staff made a request to Vision Iowa on February 1st for a 9-month extension for the completion. The staff recommendation or the administration recommends City Council approval for the CMBA proposal and authorize staff to proceed with design and the bidding the project, including the architectural agreement. The financial impact is Lamar's Area Betterment Foundation has already approved the funding of $2.2 million based on a $2.4 million project estimate. The City of Lamar's will finance the project as an urban renewal project with additional reimbursement from Vision Iowa and the Lamar's Area Betterment Foundation. Having said all that, Jason, do you want to interject anything into this?
That was a lot of words.
Well, I read it slow.
All right, a couple.
Anyway, I just want to make sure that everybody understands where we're headed on this project and what the reason why we're bringing it here today and where we're headed for, so.
All
Jason.
right, I tried to make that explanation as thorough as possible, but there is a couple additional notes I want to bring up. I did submit a request to Vision Iowa February 1st. I almost immediately received a response from them inviting me to Des Moines to ask in person. So December 31st of 2019 is still in place. If we don't complete it, you know, that's one thing. They could also decide at that point to ratchet back some of that previously approved funding, so that 450 that they previously approved for the 5 projects, they could pull back some of that, just because we're only doing 4 then, according to their timeline. You know, and we'll deal with that. They haven't, they've basically given us, I've got that in there, roughly just over half of what they've committed to give us for the project, so we'll see what they say. Secondly, I need to, in the financial impact, I described what the Mars Area Betterment Foundation had previously approved. How that works is we fill out applications and submit it to them. And as a board, they approve projects. The original application had certain aspects to it on what we were going to do within that project, and it had an estimated budget cost to it also. So if anything changes in that scope or changes in the estimate, an application